Hello everybody, it's Mr. McKeever here, and we're going to have our second weekend video series coming up right now. This is going to be about the rise of women in the feminist movement. Alright, so in order to really set this up, we really kind of have to describe what life was like for women prior to this and kind of provide us the contrast that we need to work from. Alright, so what women could do at 1875? Well, they could have kids, they could be a mom, they could work really crappy low-paying jobs, or be a prostitute. To be fair, that was really about it. Now, what they couldn't do are some pretty basic staples of society. You couldn't own property, you couldn't divorce an awful husband, you couldn't get an education, you couldn't get any kind of functionally good job, have any actual voice, or really do anything of substance with your life at all. So there's going to be a lot of room for improvement here, and we're going to make some significant changes, but not complete changes to the situation that occurs with women. Alright, we're going to break this down kind of piece by piece. So the first up in our opportunity is how do we deal with women owning stuff? Well, what we're going to see is that up to this point in time, women really didn't have any property rights at all. When you got married, all your stuff went to your husband. When you weren't married and living with your parents owned everything, and when your husbands die, your sons get everything. Now, in the offshoot chance that you are married, have no sons, and only daughters or no children at all, then you have an opportunity to have property and rights, but even in some countries, those property and rights were then given to the nearest male relative within that family. So in this scenario, for the most part, women lived at the mercy of their other family members, whether it's their husband or their kids. Until 1882, where in England women will finally get to have some basic rights with the Married Women's Property Act. This will allow them to maintain some ownership of stuff even from before marriage, through their marriage, and even after their husbands die. So this is at least a significant improvement, but it isn't going to be improvement that's relevant across all of Europe. Sometimes it takes quite a bit longer for women to even have basic rights of property, which is just all sorts of special. At home, things were even worse. Women really had absolutely no say of their own condition. They couldn't divorce husbands who were abusive or, adulterous unless they had substantial proof. Now, for women, husbands had a very easy route to getting a divorce. They could say that the woman had cheated on them, and to be fair, in many cases, if a woman had cheated on him, oftentimes the result was a child, and it was very easy to provide the evidence needed. While on the other hand, men didn't have that problem. More often than not, there is no child. It made it extraordinarily difficult for women to ever prove that men were were not living up to their end of the expectations, and when it came down to it, women wouldn't even bring it up because husbands also had the right to control what happened to children. And in many cases, women would actually be threatened with the loss of their children if they rose any situations or brought up any problems at home. If you complain to someone about what's happening at home, then I'll take the kids away and you'll never see them again. And if you were raped by someone, then be a better person, because typically that was your own responsibility. Unfortunately, a situation still in many cases is relevant today. So things are pretty awful. Are things going to improve during this period when it comes to these aspects of things, particularly women and the understanding of what they control in their own body and their own sexuality? No, it's really not. It's going to be a pretty awful period, and it really isn't until the 1970s that we see substantial improvement in women in their family home and the rights that they have in regards to spouses and eventually their own sexuality and contraception, things like that. None of those things will change until about another 100 years later. What does change, though, is education for women. But it's not a sweeping change here, folks. We're talking a pretty subtle change. To this point in European history, women didn't really have an education unless you were extraordinarily wealthy or your family was. This would provide you opportunities to provide tutors or things like that to give you an education, because schools for women didn't exist, particularly secondary schools. While child labor laws will create new state-funded schools for children, once you reached about, 5th grade, you were done. So getting that necessary education to be able to go on to a college was very difficult. Now, some countries in Europe will allow women to participate in universities. The majority will not until it gets much later. The first actually is the Swiss. The Swiss will be one of the more progressive European nations when it comes to endowing women's rights. Outside of the Swiss, it really is the British who are going to be the forefront of the women's rights movement. They're going to be the first to really allow women at their most prestigious universities. 1878 in Oxford and Cambridge, women were allowed to come take classes. But they didn't get degrees, though, until after World War I was over, which is an entirely different level of stupid. In Russia, it isn't until 1914 that women are allowed to go to universities, which is saying something because it's actually after a massive Russian Revolution and the birth of communism that they get the opportunity to do that. So that's another problem that women are dealing with. Is there any hope in regards to any sort of education for women? And there actually is, and it's going to come in the form of teaching. Teaching is going to provide women an opportunity to become involved in the educational process they never had before, because women are going to become the tailor-made elementary ed teacher. Because women are considered already maternal and great at raising children, it seemed to be very intuitive that women were going to be great teachers. So this was a great opportunity, even if it is kind of stereotypical and it really puts them on a pedestal that isn't really fair, that women are just made for raising children. What it did do, though, was provide an opportunity for teachers, because those people who wanted to become a teacher got to go to teacher training schools, and that provided them a basic level of education. And this was the first opportunity women were really getting an institutionalized education at all. So that's improvement. This will also provide new open doors for women. And once they get into education, they're going to start having more and more of an influence on the just general commercial world. Whether it's going to be with the birth of department stores and women working in retail, or becoming literate office assistants, clerks, secretaries, people who are going to at least be in the business world, if not actually having a truly paramount role in it. We'll also see women take on government jobs in many of the more progressive countries, such as Switzerland and eventually Britain. And then there's, still always the whole prostitution thing, which is still going to be an issue in most major European cities. Countrysides is not a commonplace thing for prostitution. Typically, there are still strong Christian backgrounds in those areas, and it wasn't until you moved to the cities where you had large mobile populations that prostitution really was a big issue. And it typically was exclusively for women who are moving into a new city with really no family or no job opportunities around, so they would turn to it for a few years and then use that as an opportunity to launch themselves into something else. While outside of this, we're also going to see women in the middle class make significant changes to their lives. Women in the middle class are going to be known as your housewife, and we've kind of already talked about this, but their lives for the most part are really easy. And I say easy in regards to they have very little responsibilities. They are going to be able to take advantage of the new luxuries that exist in the new industrial age as part of the second industrial revolution. This is going to provide them with the opportunities to go outside and do casual sports, bicycling, potentially play sports like badminton. And this is where we're going to see the birth of really any women's sports at all. We're also going to see women have an opportunity to get involved in charities and churches, which is really going to be one field where they really don't have any loopholes or issues that they have to deal with. Churches welcome women participation, and so do charities. Help the poor people when you don't have anything better to do, so that at least they're actively getting involved in society when everything else is effectively kept away from them. Because while their life is a little bit easier when it comes to the physical manual labor of things, they effectively are being kept out of any truly progressive or substantial careers or opportunities to make improvement to their own lives without their husband's approval. So that's kind of sad. But at least it's something. But this entire period, we call this the cult of domesticity. It's the idea of creating a woman who is a domestic household character. They aren't going to have much responsibility or any responsibility outside of the home. But we will train women in order to be okay with that. And this is actually going to be the mindset. And it's actually going to be one of the hugest hurdles that women are going to have to overcome in order to improve their lives politically. And that leads us to our last chunk for today. And that is going to be the rise of what we would call the feminist movement, or really just the women's rights movements in general. Women's rights are going to be a challenging issue during this time period. Women are going to face numerous hurdles and obstacles in their way, and many of them are not directly created by men themselves. Many of the obstacles are actually other women who don't believe women should be getting involved in these roles to begin with. So they will serve as their own hurdles and obstacles. You will also see issues with different women's rights movements across Europe who some don't like Catholics, some of them don't like Protestants. Well, we don't want to include Jewish people in this. Well, blah, 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 blah. And there's a lot of frustration in those regards because we'll see tons of movements be born, but they won't lack any cohesion, or they won't have any cohesion. They'll be disparate across Europe and incapable of really working together. And then we'll also see the hatred of socialism play a huge part in this too. Socialists absolutely detest the fact that capitalist societies relegate women to no true role in society. So when people talk about women's rights, they assume it's going to be as some form of socialism as well too. And as you guys are aware, socialism was not a hugely popular movement. While it was influential, the average person was not okay with it. So this is going to cause a lot of issues in gaining traction for the movement. But eventually it will gain traction. We're going to see some truly profound feminists through this period. Millicent Fawson is going to create the National Union of Women's Suffrage Societies. And through this, she's going to rally almost up to 500,000 women together for the rights to gain to vote, to hold public office, those basic things that we take for granted today. And then by far the most popular and outspoken, and now popular considering the movie Suffragist coming out, is Emmeline Pankhurst. She is going to be known as one of the more radical leaders. She will be supporting women taking on strikes, public protests, anything that they can in order to raise awareness for women's rights. And this will actually lead to a lot of suffering for women during this movement. People like Pankhurst and other ones, like in the United States, Alice Paul, will end up spending multiple years of their life in jail, undergoing pretty significant problems and abuse in their prison sentences. Well, eventually, they will actually receive what they are looking for. But unfortunately, it takes until after 1919, until the end of World War I, for any woman in the Western world to have the right to vote. Ridiculous. Women will be the second latest group in American history to get the right to vote, and the last group in many European nations to get the right to vote. But it's improvement. Subtle improvement, slow improvement, not enough improvement, but it is something. And it's going to start what we call a period of progressivism throughout the United States and Europe, where the rights of people are going to continue to improve. And we've already talked about it a little bit. Workers' rights continue to improve, women's rights are going to continue to improve, until we reach more the modern understanding of what people's roles in society should be. So we can celebrate it. Women finally will get the right to vote. Much, much longer overdue than we can ever truly imagine. But when it happens, it's a good thing. Thank you. You guys have a wonderful weekend. Bye-bye.